Welcome to Autism Knows No Borders, a podcast where people connected to autism inspire change and build community. Together with the Global Autism Project, I'm your host, Rachel Harmon, a professional with over a decade of experience in the field of autism services, outreach, and advocacy. This episode is part one of my conversation with Brian Middleton, which was originally released on October 22nd, 2020. Brian Middleton is an autistic self-advocate, a board-certified behavior analyst, and the creator of The Bearded Behaviorist, an initiative dedicated to the dissemination of behavior science and the inclusion of trauma-informed care standards in applied behavior analysis and other human services. In this episode, we talk about what it was like for Brian to be bullied in school, why he decided to enter the field of behavior analysis, the basic components of acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT for short, Relational Frame Theory and its connection to ACT, and the intersection of ACT and behavior analysis. In this episode, discover what's possible when you beard the lion in his den. And now, I present you Brian Middleton. Hi, Brian. Welcome to Autism Knows No Borders. Thank you for being here today.
I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me onto the show.
Could you please briefly introduce yourself?
I am a human being who happens to be autistic. I love humans. Humans are great. I have lived a life of wanting to discover and understand the world around me, and that includes people. And so initially my special interest was history, just delving deep into history. And when I went to university, I studied history, and because I was special needs as a kid, and actually my IEP, Individualized Education Plan, was around nonverbal learning disorder, which was a misdiagnosis. I was aware of special education and had a love for it because I had some really great teachers. And so when a school counselor suggested that I double major in special education, I jumped at it and fell in love with special education. I taught exactly 2 semesters of history, social sciences, that sort of stuff. And the rest of my 7-year career as a special ed teacher was special ed, or as a teacher was special ed, and loved it. Definitely challenging, but wonderful. And my third job as a teacher, because my first 2 years were more kind of low man on the totem pole, going through all the learning processes. So my third job, I was hired as the behavior special ed teacher for Canyon View Middle School in Cedar City, Utah. And that was like being thrown into the deep end with Jaws. And it was fun, and it was hard, and it was hard. And did I say it was hard? And
What was hard about it?
My schooling didn't prepare me to support the kids that I was having thrown at me. And I say that because that's how it felt. But because I am passionate and I love helping, it's always been a part of me. I love the Boy Scouts. I'm an Eagle Scout and all that cool stuff there. But I couldn't not do my best and give my all. And anytime I failed, I would tear myself apart. And so that just drove me deeper into trying to understand. And so I started exploring and doing reading on my own. And I went to an autism conference, a little regional autism conference, and the keynote speaker, who I really need to look up her name because I've forgotten her name. I'm terrible with names, but she was speaking and it resonated. And I was supposed to go to 6 other classes, and I didn't. I spent the rest of the conference just talking with her after she was done with her keynote. And she said, "Have you thought about becoming a BCBA?" And I said, "BCB what?" And she said, "BCBA." And I'm like, "Well, I'm sorry, I'm NGWA. That stands for not good with acronyms. So could you tell me what that means?" And she introduced me to board certified behavior analyst. So as I do, I delved in, I researched, and I stepped into it fully cognizant of a lot of the problems that members of the autism community have with applied behavior analysis. Mm-hmm. But I also stepped into it fully cognizant of the solidity of the science, and that, like with any science, there were some things that were an issue and there were things that were great. So I don't like blinders. I like looking at things and I like trying to find the truth as the truth is. So, there's my perception, your perception, and there's somewhere in the middle is the reality of the thing. So, I pursued it. And when I went into my postmaster's certification, because I have a master's in education, I went to a university and was in classes and was learning about all this cool stuff in a different level. And I got a little frustrated with a professor because that professor, whose name I will not share to protect the guilty, asked us to share how we could improve the class. And I've been down this road before, so I made sure to very carefully write out what my suggestions were in a way that was very positive and referencing towards things that we could do. And then I made sure my wife and my best friend read over my post before I posted it, so that way it was not coming off as anything other than, well, you asked this very important question and I'm taking it seriously and I want to help improve because that's what you asked. And I received a very long email telling me that I was using problem-oriented thinking, and he censored me. He took down my post.
What were some of your ideas?
I pointed out that there was a lot of negative reinforcement and positive punishment for completing assignments, and that there was a lot of contrived characteristics to post, so that way the post, instead of because one of the things that we had was a requirement to comment on each other's posts, and the comments were like "me too" and stuff like that, and I'm like, what if we were to remove that comment requirement and go towards quality of sharing our ideas, and that would encourage more discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And what if instead of it being you don't get points for making the comments, it's by participating in it you get points, and then if you have more comments that are meaningful, and we can have a rubric defining what meaningful means, so that way it's not subjective, that you get bonus points instead of doing, and just coming up with a little contrived token economy. And it wasn't like the most thought out thing, but it was like, hey, thank you for this opportunity to let me share some ideas on how to improve. These are some things that I see that we could do.
Yeah.
And the professor's response could have been, I'll take those under consideration. Right. And then if he didn't like him, he didn't like him. It's his class. But instead, I got censored and I got positively punished again, which, like, the ethics of behavior analysis is we shouldn't be relying on punishment.
Yeah.
And so my response was to have the typical reaction that one would have when receiving punishment, which was a emotional reaction, anger, frustration, anxiety, those sorts of things. But I have to thank him. I really have to thank him, because if it weren't for him, I wouldn't have started Bearded Behaviorist. Because my thought process was, screw you, I'm going to make ABA fun. And so that's what I did. Is December 8th of 2018, I started a little Facebook page. My best friend and now business partner, Robert Ennis, designed my logo, which is a silhouette of me when I was particularly untrimmed and
very beardy.
Very beardy. And there's a joke to Bearded Behaviorist, as I do. I love puns and jokes. And I love collecting old sayings. That's part of my special interest with history. And there's an old saying that's not currently in use, but I hope it comes back. It goes something like this: bearding the lion in its den. And that's referring to, in, I think, 1 Samuel of the Old Testament, when David and Goliath, the story that was told was about how one of David's sheep was taken by a lion, and that David pursued the lion into the cave to save the sheep, grabbed the lion by the beard or mane, and slew it. And so the term "to beard the lion in its den," or bearding, originally meant to confront a problem head on.
Oh, interesting.
So
okay.
It's a multi-level thing. It's a joke. It's also serious. And so that's the reason why I go for bearded behaviorist. And one of my podcasts, the Oh Behave podcast, is also a joke because to behave is to do anything that a living organism emits. So to say oh behave is to say live.
I get it.
And I don't know, I kind of love making those little connections and
Yeah.
celebrating life. And that's kind of the foundation of my values of how I pursue things is, yes, there's challenge, there's struggle, there's hardship, and I definitely have had my share of it, and then some, I'm sure. But what can I do to celebrate life? What can I do to celebrate the things that are great? Not to the detriment of addressing the problems, because again, bearded behaviorist is about addressing the things head on. Let's take care of it. Let's not pretend it's not there. So, yeah, that's my life in a Cliff Notes version. I'm sure
Right.
there's a lot more I could say and share, but
Yeah. Well, thank you, Brian. Let's talk about your autism. When did you first realize that you were different?
ooh, first realized I was different. 7 or 8 years old.
What did you notice about yourself?
The other kids didn't like me. That I kept on doing things wrong, but I wasn't sure what I was doing wrong, and no one would tell me.
Mm.
That adults were a lot more patient with me and more willing to help me out, but peers weren't.
Mm.
Those were the big things that kind of stuck out to me. I was lucky. My parents had a bad experience with my older sister and public school, and so my dad's job allowed for us to be homeschooled. And so my mom took on a lot of the homeschooling, and then later on found a charter school that was based in a couple hours away, but they had a kind of a distance program where they provide curriculum. And this is before the internet really took off. So part of it was when I was a tween and teen that my parents could go out and find people to teach subjects, and then they would be paid from the charter school to teach the subject. So my geometry and algebra teacher was a civil engineer who worked on the Bay Bridge in San Francisco. My chemistry teacher is the head of the Sacramento Water Lab, last I checked. Although at the time he was, an employee there, but this is years ago. So one of my art teachers was a professional artist who lived locally who was willing to teach us,
Mhm.
that sort of stuff. And so it kind of offered some really cool opportunities. And the flip side of that is it also created a buffer. So my exposure to peers was limited to Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts, to those classes with peers, and there were small groups, and they tended to be peers who were with parents who are also having those attitudes of like, we want our kids, we don't want our kids to struggle, so we're putting them in a situation where they struggle less. And then of course church.
Mhm.
And so between all those settings, like my exposure was definitely limited, and so therefore I believe that I encountered less naturalistic punishment as a result and received more naturalistic reinforcement for making choices that were, big air quotes here, right in the social context.
Yeah. Hey, Rachel here. Are you enjoying this episode? Want to hear more valuable content from others you can relate with? Be sure to subscribe to this podcast so you can stay up to date on future episodes. And now back to the conversation. So you said that you were misdiagnosed with what was that?
Nonverbal learning disorder.
Okay.
There's a lot of very similar characteristics to autism, but there's not a lot of emphasis on stimming sensory issues, those sorts of things. It focuses predominantly on misreading social cues.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what the DSM-5 did with NLD, but typically back in the 90s, like with diagnosis of Asperger's versus autism, typically it had to do with someone being diagnosed on it is having a lot more to do with whether there was somebody who was trained in that area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, that's a fun one. And I received the diagnosis when I was 14. So it was later in life. because I was very verbal and very communicative. And so it was, I was pretty good at just going along and doing things. And so therefore my parents didn't feel the need to seek out a diagnosis until I hit the big wall. And again, part of that was the buffering from homeschooling, because
Hmm.
I'm sure that if I had been going to elementary school and middle school, that wall would have hit much harder, much faster.
Yeah. Did you have any true friendships?
My dogs. And I thought I had a true friend when I was a little kid, but it was like a little kid style friendship, and very quickly moved away when he started to mature more than me. When I was 15, 16, I had a couple friends who were younger than me that we connected really well, and we maintained connection pretty decently up until about 18, and then they kind of drifted away. One of them because, well, this is me attributing. I don't know if this really happened, but one of them drifted away because he was more into the cool crowd, and I definitely wasn't cool.
Mm.
And the other one drifted away because he moved.
So, did you receive direct bullying from the other kids?
Direct and indirect. When I was 8 at church, I told a stupid knock knock joke. It was really dumb, but like it was like I wanted to get attention from my peers. And apparently, a couple of the peers didn't like it, and got shoved against the water fountain, socked in the gut, and that resulted in us leaving that congregation because one of the boys was the son of the leader of the congregation, and the other one was the nephew.
Mm. So, there was no way they were leaving.
Yeah, there's no way they were leaving, and the congregation leader's response was, "Well, what did your son do wrong?" And so there was that. I will say that years later, both of those boys reached out to me and apologized.
Oh.
So I don't want to make anybody out to be a villain. The reality is that I was different and they didn't understand how to deal with different, which is one of the reasons why acceptance training is so important, especially for children.
Hmm.
Because when we learn how to accept other people who are different, instead of it being us versus them, it's all of us versus the challenges that the world presents us.
Yeah.
So that's a big plus, I have to say. And I think part of the reason why I still have this attitude of celebration, because, like, yeah, something hard happened and it sucked so hard. But flip side of that is growth happened,
Yeah.
and that's big. And we need to focus on that. Sorry, getting a little
No,
emotional here.
don't be sorry. Thank you for sharing that.
No problem.
I know how it must feel to open up and really be vulnerable, and I really appreciate you sharing your story.
Thank you.
And there are other kids out there right now who are being bullied. And maybe if some parents are listening to this and take something from it, whether it's educating their kids to not be those bullies, that is a change that you're making.
Yeah. And there was a lot of indirect bullying. There was a lot of social shunning. Like, a lot of the misconceptions when it comes to autism is that we want to isolate. We don't want to be around other people, and that there's certainly people who are like that. But humanity as a whole, and that includes autism, and that's the reason why I say I am a human first before I say I am autistic. We have a desire to connect. Now, everybody's desire differs. So, like, I have a very good friend who he is he's himself. He is whatever he is. I don't try to identify people as anything other than a person and a friend. And he and I, when we're talking at work, because we work together, we have amazing, fun conversations that just go deep and they hit the nitty gritty and awesomeness. And then when he's by himself, he wants to be by himself.
Hmm.
And he doesn't have the urge to seek out social connection because he recharges on his own. He's an introvert. And years ago, I would be upset by that because, I encountered other introverts and I thought it was something having to do with me. But now I see him for who he is. And it's like, hey, you do you, man. I'm glad I could spend the time I spend with you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think, a big part of acceptance, is accepting that, somebody else may not have the same drives as you, or their reinforcers may not be the same reinforcers, but it's okay, because as long as they can gain the connection that they need and you can gain the connection that you need without harming other people, that's the key right there.
Yeah. I really like that. And bringing it back to that human level, just being compassionate with each other. And there are so many different ways right now at this time in history where people can be divided, and there's so much polarization and so
Mhm.
many different identities that people put on. And if we can just remove all of that and really look at the person that is in front of us for who they are and understand that we all really just want the same things at the end of the day, what better of a place this could be? I know that sounds so cliche, but sometimes people forget.
Yeah, it takes practice. Not always, but by default, when we're feeling under threat, we want to protect our reinforcement. We want to protect our things that we perceive as us. And actually, you asked me to talk about this, so I'm going to go ahead and bring it in.
Hmm.
Acceptance and commitment therapy / training. I do the / because the T is really important. It can be training or therapy. Actually talks about this idea. So it's an idea called self as context, and it's kind of a rough idea to get your head around, but I'm going to try my best to explain it.
Hmm.
And I'm going to explain it with a counter idea to it, which is self as content. So to start with, self as content is where I am this thing. I am the emotions that I feel. I am my history that I experience. I am the identity that I take on. I am 100,000% these things. And so I use, as an example, an allegory or a parable, I guess, that I've been using for years, and I didn't realize that I was using it with self as context and self as content in mind. But imagine if the story that you tell yourself is a sword or a shield. And I'll use an example of somebody who's suffering from cancer, because that's something anybody could experience. So you get the people who are using it as a shield. They're hiding behind it. I can't because I have cancer. And they're hiding behind it and using it as something to protect themselves. And then you got the people who use it as a sword and they lash out. You should do this because I have cancer. And they stab and slash at people.
Mm.
And that's self as content. That's a symbolic way of looking at that. But if you flip it to self as context, which is getting a degree of separation, so saying, I am a person who happens to be experiencing cancer, then it changes the story. Not a lot. You're still a person who's experiencing cancer or whatever the challenge is that you're facing. But it takes that sword or shield and turns it into a banner that you hold high and say, this is hard, but I can do it.
Mhm.
And there are so many people, and I use cancer as an example because I have a lot of friends who are older, and so I've interacted with a lot of people who've gone through similar life challenges, and I've seen this happen over and over and over again with those people. And the people who are the most amazing, and even if they lose the struggle to cancer, they never lose themselves. Never. Those are the people who are self as context.
Mhm.
Those are the people who are saying, this is who I am. I am the thing that experiences. I'm the thing that observes. And I might experience depression, despair, anger, hate, frustration, joy, elation, all those emotions. But those aren't me. I'm experiencing them.
Mhm.
The me is the thing that observes. And it's not a very natural way of seeing it to start with. But as you practice it and you learn that skill, it changes everything. I used to be a very angry person.
I find that kind of hard to believe. You haven't stopped smiling this whole time I've been seeing you on screen.
But it's the difference. It's the difference of the content versus context. And I think that a lot of the challenges we face in this world are because people are getting so stuck in their story that they're not seeing that I am not the sum of my experiences. I'm the sum of what I take from my experiences.
Mm-hmm.
They need to be what I take from them. Humans are the only creature on this planet that can time travel. We can go back on our minds, and time will travel back to the experience that we had that is horrific, that's traumatizing, that sucks. And we can shift our perspective so that instead of me being that little boy who had a knife to my wrist, ready to kill myself on top of my dog's grave, who was only saved because one of my other dogs ran up and knocked the knife out of my hand. Instead of that, we can see the struggle as a way to help us to grow.
Yeah,
Sorry.
that's okay. But I definitely, I hear you and I get what you're saying. Like a lot of times I think we do that playback loop of that thing that happened in the past. And we are, even though it happened in the past, it's still occurring for us in the present. And if we want to overcome whatever that breakdown was, we need to be looking at it from the present moment and maybe even a different possibility.
Yeah.
And from there, we can create something new. We can be someone who we want to be instead of continuing to live in that story that we've created.
The term that ACT uses is ruminate, that cycle of living it over and over.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that cycle so well. And I'm so glad I'm out of it.
Yeah.
I was diagnosed with clinical depression. So, like, I've experienced how far it can take you and don't want to go back. I'm very happy where I'm at now, because where I'm at now, I can experience the full gambit of feelings.
Can I ask you something? Why are you feeling so emotional about it right now? Where is that emotion coming from?
It's sadness, but it's also joy,
Mm-hmm.
because looking back, it was hard and I didn't see any way out. But I'm so happy I made it out.
Yeah. How did you get out of it?
uh, well, in that moment, the moment I talked about, that was more just coping until I got to a better place.
And how old were you then?
I can't remember exactly, but I think it was 12 or 13.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact time, but it was somewhere in that age range. But the way that I coped, which coping doesn't necessarily mean good, the way that I coped was to get angry, because anger is a secondary emotion. I like to say that anger is the anger, anxiety, fear. They're all secondary emotions that result from feeling helpless. And so I got angry, and like I wasn't always angry type thing, but I was definitely pretty angry, and pretty adamant. And one thing that characterizes me is that I am not a person who will sit down and shut up. And that's true to this day, even though I'm not angry, or not as angry as I used to be. The anger's there, but now I can look at the anger, and instead of looking at it as, so I hate how people dissociate. They say, that's not me. And I'm like, no, anger is a part of who I am. Like I feel that emotion, but I can accept the emotion and then ask myself, what's the next step? What's the thing that I can do? How do I move towards my values?
Yeah.
So that was where the coping came in. But it wasn't until about 25, 26 that I made one of my true friends, Robert Ennis, my business partner, my friend. He is also neurodiverse. He has Tourette's, and he became a sensory organ for me for social things. And flip side is I became a sensory organ for him for perceiving other things that I perceive, and we've been a great help to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And So even before I knew what behavior analysis was, I was receiving, and by the way, I did receive behavior analytics support when I was a kid through something called Scottish Rites, but I didn't know it at the time, and it was before the Behavior Analysis Certification Board came into being. And thankfully, I had a good experience with it
Mm-hmm.
because, and this is important, there have been a lot of people who've had bad experiences, and behavior analysis as a science needs to collectively take responsibility for that and change.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I am as responsible as any other behavior analyst out there, and I will be even more responsible if I don't speak out against the problems.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important to say. So sorry, that's a little sidetrack there. Um,
No, that's okay. And I want to get back to that. Let's just bookmark that and we'll come back, but you can finish what you were saying.
yeah. So it was an experiment with me and Bob where he would point out some things and I would try them out. And then, of course, it wasn't just him and me interacting with each other. We both are research people. We just love researching. We dive deep into and reading. He's really good at looking up articles and research, and I'm really good at finding books and reading those, typically through audio because I'm a big audiophile. But the long and short of it was because of his friendship and support, I was able to identify, alter, address different things, including when I read a book about body language, What Every Body is Saying by Larry Naveen, coming to him and being like, is this true? And him, who has been responding to body language instinctually, going, is it? And then us exploring it together, and then getting to the point that now I'm pretty dang good at reading body language because it's a skill. You learn it. It's learning through consequences. That's literally what behavior analysis is all about. And anytime people get lost and forget that, they're missing the point. That we all learn through consequences, regardless of our neurological area or niche. And so that made a big difference. And we still learn from each other. We were talking last night and just talking about perceptions of what we think people will do versus what they actually do, and how we can improve on each other and grow each other. It's, it's a wonderful friendship. And the same thing for my wife, Heather. She really helps me to grow. We're always looking for ways to help each other improve in a kind, loving way. So
Oh, that's great.
that's the end of that anecdote. If you want to go back to the behavior analyst thing.
Yeah, well, so a couple of things I wanted to go back to. First, was there anything else you wanted to add about ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy? So you've talked about self as context. Do you want to just briefly go over the other components of it?
Yeah,
And maybe you could also just explain how this ties into applied behavior analysis.
definitely. So to start with how it ties in, ACT is founded on a experimental analysis theory called relational frame theory. And relational frame theory is a continuation of B.F. Skinner's verbal operants. Now, some people are probably, who are behavior analysts and know about this stuff, are probably screaming because they're like, it's not the same. And so there's some camps out there. There's some people who are saying it's totally different, and others that are saying it's the same.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happens in science. You have disagreements, and that's cool. I love it. Me personally, I see it as a continuation, and a beneficial continuation. But the premise of relational frame theory is that we make relational connections between things. So probably the best example is, think of a song that you loved at one point, and then something tragic in your life happened. And now that when you hear that song, it brings you pain.
Mm.
That is our relational frame, relational networks in our brain, making those connections. And that actually leads beautifully into explaining the first concept in ACT, which is called cognitive or verbal fusion. And that's the idea that we fuse, F-U-S-E, or fusion, F-U-S-I-O-N, with an idea and an emotion. We connect those two together. And then when we get those two things connected together, that results in us being stuck. Or it results in us solving problems. Because the reason why this relational frame is such a big deal is because we solve problems. The fact that you and I can talk to each other across the world over electricity being turned on and off, because that's what ones and zeros are, is the one is the electricity on and zero is electricity off. And we can have an amazing conversation that's recorded and that can be distributed to other people, is because somebody took this idea that seemingly was unconnected and connected with this other idea that was seemingly unconnected, and we discovered something new. And it's a wonderful thing, but it's also the source of our pain and suffering. And so the core premise of acceptance commitment therapy is that life is filled with pain, and that's inevitable. But it doesn't have to be filled with suffering. And so this is where diffusion comes in. So think fusion, but diffusion, D-E-F-U-S-I-O-N. Yeah, diffusion. Mm-hmm. It's the ability to disconnect the feeling and the idea from each other. And there's a couple different techniques. And the thing that I love about ACT is that there are so many ways to do it. And you find your way. There's no wrong or right way, as long as you accomplish the thing. I diffuse through humor. I love making jokes. But you can use a diffusion technique to avoid the pain, which it will backfire. Because the next part of the process is, once you've diffused, you have to accept. And acceptance isn't something that is easy. It's easy to describe, but it's not easy to do. And the easiest way that I've come up with describing acceptance is walking downstairs. When you first start walking downstairs, it's scary. It is frightening, because you have to fall forward. You have to let your step go down. And you could certainly control your muscles every step of the way, but that would be exhausting. So you have to accept that there comes a point where it just has to happen. And interestingly, when you diffuse and you accept, it not only deals with emotional pain, but it can actually alter physical pain. There's been research that's been done with ACT on burn victims. And without painkillers, they have significantly reduced, I don't remember the exact estimated percentage, but significantly reduced the pain that these people who are dealing with something that's horrific are actually experiencing.
Could you actually just go back to diffusion and give me another example? So you said that you use humor. Mm-hmm. What's another way to diffuse?
So we all have that inner voice, that inner judge that's telling us something. So you can perceive that thing, that voice, and you can sing it as a song. So, like, for example, I know somebody who they like using Happy Birthday, the song Happy Birthday. So they'll, you're really stupid, you can't do this, you are going to fail, and it's gonna be okay. Like something like that, where it's basically allowing yourself to have some distance. And so another way to diffuse is to take a short phrase or word and try to embody all the emotion into it, and then repeat that thing once per second for 35 to 40 seconds, which that's actually one of the studies that they've done on that, to see how consistently. So if, for example, I have a fear of getting in the car because I got into a really bad car accident. That's not me, but that's a very real fear. So if I were to say car, 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 all the way through the 40 seconds, by the time that time is done, it just turns into k-r. That's it in my mouth, and the emotion is pulled away from it.
Okay.
And if you go out there, there's the world's longest running Yahoo group is an acceptance and commitment therapy, continuously running Yahoo group is an acceptance and commitment therapy group. There's tons of Facebook groups, forums, chats. I know there's folks on Reddit. This massive community of people who are wanting to support and help each other and share how they diffuse, how they accept all these different things. And it's wonderful, because the research has actually shown that you don't need a therapist to use ACT.
Mm-hmm.
As long as you're consistently practicing, the outcomes are pretty much the same. And if you have somebody who can support you and encourage you to do it, then the outcomes get better
Mm-hmm.
because you're learning how to use these skills. And literally there's 6 discrete observable skills that can be done that if you consistently practice and use them once a week, once a day, whatever you want to do, you're going to increase your psychological flexibility and strength. And so a lot of people assume that behavior analysis is behaviorists. We don't believe thoughts, feelings, emotions, memories, those sorts of things are behavior. And that's a mistake, because there was a behaviorism that came before radical behaviorism called methodological behaviorists. And they said, if you can't observe it, it's not a behavior. And the reason why B.F. Skinner was radical and those that followed him is because we're like, no, those are behaviors. Those are real things. Like, just because the observer is one person doesn't mean that it's not a thing. And that's the reason that RFT and by relation ACT was able to be developed, was because the question was asked. Now, I like to say that ACT is the baby of behavior analysis and cognitive behavioral therapy, because there's a lot of ideas that CBT has that were right, because, theorizing and those sorts of things. And so there's kind of a partnership that's going on there. And so cognitive behavioral therapists who have training in ACT are capable of providing that. But the principal researcher and founder of ACT, Stephen C. Hayes, I was introduced to ACT at an ACT conference for behavior analysts, and somebody asked about whether or not Dr. Hayes would expect there to be licensure requirements for ACT, and his response was, "Why?" Because he doesn't want it to be limited. He wants people to access this thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And all the ACT folks, the specialists that I talk to and I learn from it, I am by no means a specialist. I am not an expert on this, but I'm learning and I'm passionate. And that's the key, is you don't need to be an expert to learn and to apply. And I make sure that all this stuff that I'm talking about, I'm applying with all my kids. Doesn't matter if they're non-vocal, doesn't matter if they're a little kid, doesn't matter if they're a teenager or a tween. It's always being applied. And I'm always looking for ways of helping these kids learn these skills, because heaven help me, if I had had that skill as a kid, I wouldn't have been at that place where there was a knife to my wrist.
Mm.
But the flip side of that is, if I hadn't have been in that place where that knife was at my wrist, I wouldn't be able to have the compassion and understanding I have now.
Mm-hmm.
So there's my time traveling.
Yeah, well, you're taking what happened to you and using it to help other people so that they won't have to feel that way.
Yeah. So the core components of ACT are diffusion, acceptance, being in the present moment, values, committed action, and self as context. And they can be applied in any, they're not sequential. It can be in any order. But the key there is that being in the present moment can't be for the purposes of escaping. The acceptance does need to occur, because you can be mindful, you can be present as a way to escape the feelings that you have. And the reason why I make this big deal, and I kind of jumped ahead of myself there, but I'll bring it back, is because remember that relational frame thing that we do, where we like to make those connections. Well, if you're trying not to feel the pain, don't feel the pain, don't feel the pain, don't feel the pain, do anything but feel the pain, try to escape the pain, that's just going to increase the pain.
Mm-hmm.
And what's going to do is, even if you find a temporary relief for the pain, like substances, drugs, alcohol, video games, pornography, all those things, even if you find a temporary relief for the pain, by the very act of trying to avoid the pain, you're going to connect the pain with that thing. Don't think about a pink elephant. Well, I'm thinking about a yellow rhinoceros. Well, yeah, but by thinking about a yellow rhinoceros, you're trying not to think about the pink elephant. So you are thinking about the pink elephant even as you're thinking about a yellow rhinoceros.
Thanks for tuning in to Autism Knows No Borders. Come back next week for part 2 of my conversation with Brian Middleton, where we discuss the neurodiversity movement. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to hear more from autistic self-advocates, family members, and professionals in the field of autism services. By supporting our podcast, you'll be helping our mission to transform how the world relates to autism. Thanks for listening. Take care.